My staff is suggesting, specifically my wife, is suggesting that you open all these wines and drink them right now, and then you can buy them more of what you like. I think it's a great idea. I think you should open up all those wines, and you should have them out in front of you and watch this video and drink them over a couple days, because any of these wines are not going to die in one day. They're young and fresh and beautiful. Hi, welcome. I wish I could welcome you here in person, but we're limited. I also wish you could taste all these wines here with our staff and enjoy the property. The spring, everything is growing really beautifully. Our vines are all popping up their tubes. The trees are starting to actually grow again, which is a really good thing. But we are socially distanced. So we're going to do a socially distanced tasting for your new spring 2020 wine club. I'm not going to add the addendum COVID wine club, although I guess I just did. There are 6 wines in your wine club if you're an existing customer. If you're a new customer, one of the wines will be changed, and that would be the first sparkling wine we've ever done, because there's very, very little of it. So I always thought I'd start out with the red wines. They're all from, well, not all of them, but 3 of them are from the 2017 vintage, which is significantly different than the previous 3 vintages that you have tasted or are drinking right now. 2014, 15, and 16 were all really early vintages. Instead of picking in the beginning of October, we were picking in the middle of September, sometimes a little before the middle of September. The growing season started early. It was a very warm spring. Well, the weather was very good during bloom, so there was very large crops in 14, 15, and 16. And the summers were all very warm. In fact, as a group, they were the 3 warmest vintages that we've ever recorded in Oregon wine history. 2017 produced wines that were very well balanced. And these are wines that are really good with food because they're in balance. They're really nice to age because the alcohols are a bit lower than in a warm vintage. The acids are a bit higher than in a warm vintage. And that means that the integration of the wine and the way the wine evolves over time is more quiet, more, I keep using the word balanced, but that's what they are. They're balanced. That's kind of the definition of it. I like those vintages. Now, 2014, 15, and 16 were all really nice vintages, and we managed to achieve a really nice flavor, acid, tannin profile in all 3 vintages, and I'm still very happy with them. But 17 in its own is a return to what you would think of more classic Oregon wines. So let's, we're going to do the first one, which is 2017 Temperance Hill Vineyard. Temperance Hill is an organically farmed vineyard in the Eola Hills. It's actually in the Eola half of the Eola-Amity Hills. And in the Eola part, it is just about the highest altitude planting that exists. The vines go up to 860 feet. From the top of the vineyard, you can see to the west the Van Duzer corridor. In fact, we did our eclipse party there because you could see 60 miles from one direction from east to west. This vineyard is on old volcanic soil. The higher up in the hill you go, the thinner the soils get. Volcanic tends to bring out red fruit and cherry, but because it's so thin, it creates a much greater struggle for the vine than in the Dundee Hills, where the soils tend to be 8, 10, or more feet deep. At Temperance Hill, at the top of the vineyard, this cell's probably 18 inches. And at the lower parts of our blocks, probably about 3 feet, but that's about it. So because it's high, it's cooler. Because it's very exposed from east to west, it's windy, especially in the afternoon. That also creates stress. It shuts the vine down. That limits the amount of sugar that the vine can accumulate and increases the amount of acidity. It actually doesn't really increase it technically. What it does is it slows the loss of acid as the grapes actually mature. So because it's not losing as much acid, because it's not as hot in the afternoon during the final part of the growing season, the acid is not metabolized by the plant for energy, but left in the grapes for us to make wine out of. So that there's a brightness, there's a freshness of Temperance Hill. It also takes the signature for the Yosemite Hills, which is this kind of sweet pie spice quality that we find in general in all the vineyards that are in this appellation. It takes that spice in this particular part of the Yosemite Hills and emphasizes it as almost a smokiness to the spice. And that smokiness in the spice added with the higher acidity, the lower alcohol, the greater freshness makes a wine that I love in the summer. It's my favorite wine, especially when I'm grilling. It seems like the charcoal and the smoky spice quality and that kind of bright easiness of the wine is really beautiful match. So here's to you. I'll drink if you're not. So Temperance Hill 17. It smells pretty good. You'll like it too. Definitely fresh, bright, some nice floral kind of components. It's got that kind of brightness that a cooler vintage has, because one of the advantages of the little bit extra acid is that the wine has more of a brighter red ruby than a more brick red, just because the acidity is a little bit higher and pH is a little bit lower. It tastes really good. It's very fresh, very lively. Lots of spice around the edges of your cheeks, but that kind of that red cherry, very fresh, vibrant flavors. Very gentle, gently fading a little bit into the finish, but really the juiciness, the freshness, it stays in your mouth. I'm salivating like crazy. I just want to eat, maybe some nice Wisconsin brats or some grilled lamb chops, or, it's great with salmon. The salmon would be really good, and maybe a little fresh slaw salad with a little Asian flavors to it. Are you hungry yet? You can call. We'll make you some food to take out if you don't want to cook. Alana thought she had tasted this next to the 2016 Temperance Hill and thought that I should compare the two. Well, they're really different. Oh my goodness.
Just the color difference.
Yeah. I don't know. Can you see that against my fabulously colored shirt? The 17 is deeper, it's darker, it's more concentrated. The quality of the fruit in the 16, which was of the 14, 15, 16 vintages, was the warmest one we picked, which tends to bring out the big kind of robust, in-your-face fruit quality, and is exactly doing that. So if you like big fruity wines, buy some more 16 Temperance. It's got that more jammy quality to the fruit, richer, bigger, more forceful. It really follows through into the mouth. You've just got the 16 is just bigger, not nearly as charming, not as juicy as the 17. Probably, if from my point of view, this 16 I would just drink, who cares? People are coming over, I need a bottle of red wine. Here, have some of this. You'll see a lot of smiles. The 17, all I want to do is just drink it myself and eat something, because it just, you know, that's what it epitomizes to me. And in general, over my 32 years, this is how I've often seen vintages. There are vintages that are just like, geez, that's just really drink me now. And then there's those vintages that are like, here, I'm going to go find something to eat. Because this is a wine that just speaks to food and isn't so powerfully rich that you think, oh, I'm just going to have this by itself. Food's going to get in the way. So for me, I'm drinking this 17 right now because I love the freshness. I love the charm. All right, so the next wine is from Zenith Vineyard, 2017 Pinot Noir Zenith. As I'm sure you remember, most of you, Zenith was our estate winery from 2006 through 2017. This is the last vintage that we picked grapes from Zenith Vineyard, and the last vintage we'll make wine from that site. A significant part of the 9 blocks that we had at Zenith that we farmed just for St. Innocent went into the Vlossak cuvée, the 2017 Vlossak cuvée. We decided that in the last vintage we didn't want to have a boatload of wine to sell, but we really just wanted to have the best of the best to sell. And so after looking at all the different blocks, of the 9 blocks, I chose to keep just the 777 clone, which was grown in a southeast and a southwest facing hill, for the Zenith Vineyard designated Pinot Noir. And because of that, we didn't make very much. We only made 437 cases, as opposed to 1,400 to 1,500 cases that we had made in the previous 8 years. Zenith is sustainably certified under the LIVE program. In relationship to Temperance Hill is essentially really high in the middle section of the Oeil de Hills, and Zenith is essentially immediately to the south and very low. The valley that Zenith essentially is at the end of is an east-facing valley about the middle of the Oeil de Hills, and the vineyard is nestled in a little bowl that actually has vineyards that face southeast, south, and southwest, kind of this little bowl with a lot of nice light. But it's protected from the hot part of the afternoon by the much larger hillside that goes off to the west up to the almost like hourglass middle of the Oeil de Hills, and then by a smaller hill to the east that essentially secludes the opening of that east-facing valley from the flat Willamette, the center of the Willamette Valley. So it's relatively protected and moderate in temperature. Doesn't get really hot in the afternoon, doesn't see late afternoon hot sun or the heat that's really on the whole other side of the Oeil de Hills. It's on completely different soil, on very old sedimentary soil that has siltstone down below that. The siltstone is so dense and so hard that it is essentially like concrete down underneath the vineyard. And the siltstone layer goes from about 5.5 feet where the block 1C, the 777 block, that is about half of this, up to the top of the hill where it actually gets even thinner. And then the soil is also reasonably deep on the 1C block of 777, which is facing southwest. The soil is very poor at Zenith and doesn't hold a lot of water late in the season. So there is often some drought stress in hot years, which isn't an issue in 2017. It also is not, because it doesn't have that clay content and the volcanic kind of soil, it's not as much focused on the cherry quality as it is on a more of a mixed set of berries. Zenith for me is the wine that is it matches with almost anything. It's the easiest of all of our wines to just say, I'm eating this, I'm gonna drink this, and it'll work. You can have it with almost anything you think of for dinner or anything that you think of for appetizers. It's just a very food flexible wine and has the broadest range of flavors, aromas, those kind of things. So this is the 17. Here it is in my glass. Soon it will be in my mouth. I'm immediately struck by the more floral and the more kind of berry, marionberry, raspberry. There's a little bit of cherry, but it's kind of more of a melange with the other qualities of the fruit. The floral is there. The spices really don't have that smoky quality of Zenith. It's much more of a sweeter baking spice. I'm kind of getting a little bit of allspice, even a little hint of ground ginger in this. Not so much the darker nutmeg clove thing that I get out of Temperance Hill. It's very nice. I mean, I keep smelling it because it smells good. The other part about Zenith in the mouth is that it has more of the savory qualities. Where Temperance Hill is juicy and fresh and bright with the spice, Zenith has more of a sense of something that you might, like notes that you might find in interesting sauce. Say you're making a reduction of stock and herbs and a little garlic or a little onion, maybe you're throwing a little tomato paste in it or something like that. It's more of the kind of flavor potpourri that you find in food, which is one of the reasons that it's so easy to match with food, because instead of just having, you know, these sort of candy and sweet things that we talk about in a lot of wines, I always wonder, when we talk about wine, we say, oh, it has this fruit and this, you know, this sweetness and all this kind of stuff, and it almost makes me think, well, am I having this wine with dessert? Because it sounds like dessert. It sounds like candy. Or does it sound like the flavors you find in food? And for me, this particular Zenith has got more of the kind of flavors that just instantly attract the flavors of the meal you're eating. You know, when you eat some grilled meat with some chimichurri or something on it, all of a sudden this wine is just like, oh yeah, like no problem, I'm there all over this thing. Or the salmon that we do with the balsamic and the garlic and, you know, the soy sauce, the lemon juice, that kind of rich, kind of textured thing. Zenith is like, oh yeah, I'm good with that too, no problem. It has a little bit fuller, a little bit denser, a little bit lower in my mouth kind of flavor profile. Again, I just want to put more in my mouth because I want to keep the thing going. I'm swallowing, forget the spitting thing. It's a very nice bottle of wine. In this particular vintage, I think it will last. Zenith has always aged very well, and I think this will age as long as almost any other vintage of Zenith that I've made. So you don't have to be in a hurry, but there's only 400 in some cases, so you know what? Do what you want with it.
How many years?
How many years is the question? The answer is, I don't know. 20 if you want, but I'll probably have drunk it long before that. We also made a special selection. So we basically took those two blocks. We had, you know, high 20s of barrels from the two blocks, maybe 30 barrels. And we went through and picked just 5 that we thought were really spectacular. Zenith was very nice in this final 17 vintage. I mean, it was a good vintage for it. So we took 5 of those barrels and we made a special selection. And there's 1 bottle in your wine club. And if you want an extra one, there's a few extras. This is special selection Zenith all 777 clone. And as I expect, there's just more. There's more focus to the fruits. There's more focus in the floral. It's like you just took the wine and crammed another chunk of flavor and aroma, well, aroma so far, flavor in a minute, into the glass.
You know, when I just drank that, I just wanted to say, wow. I find across the mid palate that it's just broad. Like it's just really, really nice across the mid palate.
I can't argue. In fact, I heartily agree. There's just a lot of flavor, and the idea of all the special selections is to look at what was happening in a particular site, in a particular place, in a particular vintage that was just extraordinary. And then looking and saying, how can I capture the best of that thing that did really well in that year? How can I capture that in a bottle of wine? And we don't make very much. I mean, 5 barrels produces about 120 cases. And probably, 80 plus of those cases goes into wine clubs. And there's a little bit left over that we age for a little while. And if you want, you can ask Felice and Maggie or anybody in the tasting room for an extra bottle. This is a wine that, although it's a really wow wine now, these are also wines that are meant to be able to lay down for a few years. Again, you can go 25. I'm not. I won't do that for any of the special selections. But between 8 and 12 years, these wines rock people's hearts. I mean, I've just gotten, last year I was touting the 2004s about how beautiful they were, and now and people were sending me emails about drinking them. Now people are sending me the 2005s, which are fresh and vibrant and incredibly appealing, enjoyable, making people happy, which is a bit of a challenge right now in this situation that we're going through. If I can make a wine that in 10 or 12 years or 8 years, you'll drink and say, wow. And given that the 2005 sold for about, $28, it'll seem like an incredibly good deal for what you paid for what you get in your glass. That's what I'm really trying to do here. So it's not really a wine that's designed for you to just take it home and drink it. But you don't have to wait decades to do that either. I basically don't think that decades, the wines are interesting, they've remained interesting, but they're really fascinating in that 8 to 12 year window for these special wines. So that's Zenith, and sorry, but I need to take another taste. Okay, the last red wine in your wine club is Freedom Hill. This is 2016. So why am I putting a 16 in with all the 17s? Well, the reality is that Freedom Hill produces a lot of structure. Just like you wouldn't buy a great Bordeaux and drink it from 2017 right now. That would be stupid. This is a wine that has more tannin, more acid, because of the location of the vineyard and the way the grapes grow. There's just always more guts. And because of that, it's the last wine that we release and the wine that you have with the biggest food, because big wines go with bigger foods. Delicate wines tend to go with more delicate foods. But this is what my nickname is, the big boy, and it goes with big boy foods. Now that doesn't have to be big hunks of meat. That can be, a roasted vegetable lasagna that my wife makes. It can be a rich pasta dish, pasta with meatballs. I mean, things that have a lot of flavor. Beets tend to have a lot of flavor. Something with beets in it would be great. Roasted vegetables tend to have a lot of flavor. You can create flavor, depth, and density by doing things to the vegetables, the proteins that you're doing that just sort of add richness. Braising adds that kind of richness. And these wines, this and Momtazi, always work really well. I'm going to actually hand this bottle off to my staff, who you can't see, but they look great. And they're going to get some to drink right now, so out of the way. So, Freedom Hill is in an area that is essentially where the Coast Range meets the valley south of Salem and far west of Salem, specifically between Dallas and Monmouth. There is an old mountain called Mount Pisgah, and this area has requested an appellation or American Viticultural Area, AVA, with the name Mount Pisgah. It's pending. We think that will be approved. There's not a lot of vineyards in this area. Because it is so far west, the winds that come off the ocean tend to hit Freedom Hill early in the evening. It's not really a blow wind like the Van Duzer. It's more of a tumbling cold air mass that just comes over the coast range and kind of descends into the vineyard. But the other big difference is that unlike most vineyards that you go to, when you look east, you see more hills. You don't see the Cascade Mountains from very many sites. At Freedom Hill, you look east and you're staring at the Cascades. There are no hills between Freedom Hill, even though it's so far west, between that area, the Mount Pisgah area, and the Cascade Mountains. So they get very early sunlight in the morning, which means long hours of sun, which is something that Pinot Noir especially appreciates. Sun early in the morning, big for Pinot Noir, makes it happy. Big smiley faces on all the grapes. And if you go to Burgundy, you'll notice that there's a gigantic hill to the west of all of Burgundy, and to the east of Burgundy it's flat until the sun rises over the Jura a long ways away. So Pinot Noir in Burgundy also gets very early light in the morning. It's just something that the grape tends to like. So Freedom Hill, darker, more dense to the color, also on really old sedimentary soil, but not the concrete siltstone underneath it that Zenith has, not the sand dune that Shea has, but just old eroded sedimentary layers and layers and layers way down deep. It's a very dry place generally, but underneath that soil, there's moisture. Now, putting a well in, it's always been an issue at Freedom Hill. There isn't much water on the site. You drill a well, you don't get much. So in order to do spraying in the vineyard, which requires water, they have to actually drive a flatbed with a big tank on it into town and get it filled up with water. So they have enough water because there's not enough water on the site. But interestingly, it's a completely dry farm vineyard, and the vines don't really have water stress except in very extreme conditions. They don't get water stressed. And there's no drip because there's no water to put in a drip system. So it's a dry farm vineyard, but even from 5 or 6 years, the vines always seem to have enough water. So there is something down there. The roots can go deep enough to always find the moisture that they need. One of the things about Freedom Hill that distinguishes it from every other site is that it's very consistent. In wet years, it tends to be drier at Freedom Hill. In hot years, it's not as hot. In cold years, it seems like it has a little more warmth. You know, in very dry years, it seems like it gets enough moisture to keep the grapes in balance. So the wines from Freedom Hill vary less from vintage to vintage than any other site that we work with. That's especially true and nice in the Chardonnay and the Pinot Blanc, which have a profile based more on the way those grapes grow in that site than being hugely varying from vintage to vintage depending on the weather conditions, because it seems like Freedom Hill is just a moderating influence. But the bigness is always there. The other thing about Freedom Hill, for me, that distinguishes it is that there is this sense of the earth, of the terroir, of what some people call minerality. We know that you don't taste the minerals in the soil. The vine doesn't suck up the minerals and push them out into the fruit and you taste it. We know that that's not true in any way, shape, or form. But vines that grow on very old ocean floor sedimentary soils, and this is actually the oldest sedimentary soils where wine grapes are grown in all of Oregon. The analogy to that is Chablis in France, which produces Chardonnay, which has a really great sense of minerality, a sense of the earth. And so for me, when I smell this, I also think I'm smelling the earth, beyond the really interesting dark kind of cherry, berry quality of the nose. And for me, it's more about dark cherries than it is about berries. But I always get this sense almost of like wet clay. There's no clay in this vineyard, but I get this sense of it underneath it, and this kind of rich earthiness underneath the aromas of fruit and a little bit of flowers, a little bit of spice. There's like this connection to the earth in Freedom Hill. And boy, does that translate to the mouth in this wine. It is rich and big without being heavy, without being, prodding. It doesn't have, comparing all the way back to the 16 Temperance Hill, it doesn't have that sort of jammy weight of fruit underneath it. What it has is a connection to density and power in almost an effortless way. Clearly the tannins were completely ripe when we picked this fruit. Clearly we didn't get too much that we got this drying sawdust thing, because it doesn't exist in this wine. It just has this rich, kind of hearty connection that I find really appealing. This is the kind of wine that I like to drink with, a really nice piece of aged meat. Not like a giant 2-pound porterhouse, but, maybe, a hanger steak sliced thinly, that you just kind of get that lovely charcoal on the outside and the kind of juiciness, because you don't cook it very much, in the inside, and you put this wine in your mouth, and it's like, I get it. Leg of lamb would be great with this. I'm going to have some more because I like it. All right, so that's it for the red wines with the little addendum. If you're a Reds Only member, we're also sending you another bottle of the 15 Freedom Hill, which is really good. And if you're one of those people that says, well, I don't open a bottle, at night when I kind of want one because I'm not going to finish a whole bottle, I only want a nice glass of wine. Here, buy some of this. This is half bottles of 2015 Freedom Hill. And for the last year and a half, our half bottles are exactly half price. So you're only paying for the wine. But the price for Freedom Hill in 15 was $42 a bottle. The price for Freedom Hill in 16 is $45. So actually you can buy 2 of these little nuggets of gold for less money than the bottle of 15 Freedom Hill, which I put somewhere, 16, sorry, edit that out, 16 Freedom Hill. So not only is it a really nice bottle at a completely fair price based on the beverage content, not on the cost of the cork and the extra label and the foil to me, but based on what you're actually getting, but because of the price increase, it's a ridiculously good deal. And what the hell, if you need another one, just open it up. You didn't pay any more for it. So think about this. We got a boatload of it, and we only make it in the best vintages. So the next time we're going to have half bottles of Freedom Hill after 15 isn't 16 or 17. It's not till 2018. So we're only bottling in half bottles the best vintages of Freedom Hill from now on. All right, enjoy. Now we're going to get some white wine in a new glass. Station break. White wines in your club. There are 2. One of them is from Freedom Hill, growing not quite right next to the Pinot Noir, but like a little triangle, a couple 100 meters away. And it's Pinot Blanc. Now, if you're really astute and you listen to all the details of all the stuff that I went on ad infinitum on, you'll remember that I said that in 17 there were some heat spells in August, and that it did affect one crop, and that was this crop. So, Pinot Blanc is grown on a different kind of trellis than Pinot Noir or Chardonnay. It's a trellis where instead of the grapes being along a wire that's probably about a little bit low waist height, and with the foliage growing up above it vertically, protecting it from the heat of the day, Pinot Blanc is grown where the fruit and the canes grow out of the top of the trellis and then hang draped down on either side. That means the fruit is up high, and as the growing season progresses, the early leaves, which are close to where they started growing, start to senesce and fall off. So that the fruit in Pinot Blanc is much more exposed to the sunlight, especially in the middle of the day when it's the most intense. And that happens every year in Freedom Hill. But for reasons that none of us can really explain, in 2017, it fried some of those clusters. In fact, not just some, but about 40% of the clusters where the stem of the cluster attaches to the cane of the plant, it basically burned it. And it stopped allowing food to get to the grapes, water to get to the grapes, things that cause the grapes to mature to get to the grapes. And the grapes started to shrivel and turn kind of lightly brown. Now, normally, when you get close to harvest, those are the clusters that are actually super ripe and taste fabulously sweet and wonderful. In fact, when you're making botrytis wines, late harvest wines, you're kind of looking for that. But in this particular case, those grapes were not mature. The acid was, oh my goodness, put it in your mouth and think you just sucked on some really bad lemons. And there was no flavor. And it was almost 40% of the fruit in this 3-acre block of Pinot Blanc. The day before we picked the sparkling wine, which were also made from this same area, we actually realized that this had become a problem. The growers, we didn't really get till we actually started tasting close to harvest that this was a real big problem. We ended up cutting that 40% of the fruit off the day before we picked the sparkling grapes. Then we made sparkling wine out of about a third of what was out there, and the rest of it we made Pinot Blanc. Now normally for Pinot Blanc from Freedom Hill, we make 800 or 1,000 cases every year. Been doing it for more than almost 2 decades now. But in this vintage we made just over 500 cases because so much got chopped off. And then we also took part of it, something we're doing every year, to make sparkling Pinot Blanc, or what's called Cremant. The small amount of Pinot Blanc from Freedom Hill from 2017. Yeah. Here, you guys can have some too. I'll share. Pinot Blanc is an unusual grape in Oregon. Only 1% of the 24,000 acres of grapes in Oregon is Pinot Blanc, so about 230 acres. Very small amount. It's an extremely small production. There's way more Riesling than there is Pinot Blanc made in Oregon. I think it's a really interesting wine that's distinctly different from all the other white grapes and different in the way it works with food than any of the red wines. Particularly, it's good with shellfish. It's good from things that come out of the ocean, the salinity of the ocean, the richness of shellfish, the textures of shellfish. And the reason that I started making it is because I actually didn't really like the Chardonnay or the Pinot Gris with mussels or Dungeness crab or diver scallops or clams, for that matter, I like to eat. I like these foods. And at the time I started making it, which was the first vintage was 1997, so this is actually the 21st vintage of this wine. The reason I started making it is because I thought it would work really well. Pinot Blanc has a very broad aroma that reminds me of the fruit we pick off of trees in the fall. So pears, apples, Asian pears, and you think of the potpourri of pears and the huge potpourri of apples and the flavors from green apples to red apples to Honeycrisp, all of those kind of things. There's a smell to those if you go into a fruit shop, and there's all kinds of apples, the plum fruits in the fall. And to me, that's a lot of what this reminds me of. What often happens with Pinot Blanc, because it is such pretty fruits in the aromas and fruits in the mouth, is that it becomes kind of a simple, fruity white wine to drink. And because I'm more focused on white dishes, ocean food dishes that are actually about texture and richness, the way I make this is to try to bring out more texture and richness in the wine. So if I wanted to make a wine that was really all about fruit and just capture the fruit part of Pinot Blanc, I would pick the grapes, I would ferment them very cold in stainless steel and bottle the wine very young. So I've just essentially pick all the vibrancy of the fruit and let that be the only thing the wine really shows. Now, I'm not that interested in that. I'll drink other people's if I want it. What I'm really interested in the fact that Pinot Blanc can be really textural. And so what we do is we actually make two different wines. One of them in stainless steel, which tends to keep more of the fruit up front, but rather than bottling it really young, we actually leave it on the yeast lees for about 8 months, basically until June the next year. And the yeast lees adds things as the yeast cells die, it releases flavors and aromas and essentially creates texture on the palate. The other part of the wine, about 20% of it, in most vintages, is done in barrels, but oversized barrels and the old barrels. I don't want the wood from the barrel, but in a barrel, because it's a relatively small container that has a really big bottom essentially, there's a much larger layer of yeast in the barrel compared to the volume of wine, because the barrel's this big around and the yeast is all the way around there, where the tank is 10 feet high and the bottom is only this big around. So the ratio of the surface area for the yeast to interact with the wine is much greater in a barrel. Plus, a barrel allows moisture and alcohol to move through the staves of the wood, which gives you a little bit of concentration, about 6% actually concentration in that vessel. And as that moisture moves out, we open the barrel and top it up to keep the barrel full. But the opening allows a little bit of air, which read oxygen, to get to the surface of the wine. And that creates a whole nother series of reactions in the wine that are all about texture. So the barrel part of this is designed to add a little bit more texture to the wine, and the stainless steel part is a little bit less texture, but both are more than just cold fermentation in stainless, bottled very young. We basically take the two wines, the tank after 8 or so months, the barrel after 8 or so months, put them together and bottle it. And the result is what you feel in your mouth. So in this wine, rather than the fruit hitting you like a flash of light and coating your palate and then basically going away just as fast, the idea here is that you get that fruit, but it stays around. I can still taste the fruit. I can still taste this kind of lovely apple, Asian pear kind of juice, maybe a little bit of, you know, compote or puree in my mouth from however long ago that I put it in there. And that's the texture and the length on the palate, which I think works so well with the things, those salty things that come out of the ocean, because they're very textural, very rich. And that would also work with things like, think about the difference between a piece of cooked fish and a tartare fish, the way it feels in your mouth. And that's the other thing that this also plays with really, really well. Now, if you ask my wife, she'll say, the reason that we have a refrigerator at home is to keep this cold for when she comes home so she can have a glass. Because it is just the perfect, after a hard day's work, glass of wine, and you can put it in the refrigerator and drink it over a couple days or 3 days, or if it lasts that long, 4, and it still tastes good. It doesn't fall apart. So it's loveliness.
So did I see you stirring the lees in the barrel?
Never. I've never stirred the lees
For the Pinot Blanc?
in any of the white wines.
Okay.
I don't stir lees. I used to stir lees in Chardonnay, but it oxidizes and it's kind of a caramely, sweet undercurrent. And because I don't think that those are really flavors of the vineyard or of the vine, we don't stir the lees of anything. All right, now, the other thing that came, oh, wait, there's a question. Just a minute.
If there's any residual sugar.
There is no residual sugar in the white wines. Okay? No, we try to ferment them dry. We don't always succeed 100%, but we're way under the human average threshold for sugar, way under what that number would be, which is about 0.5% sugar is what we can. So essentially, if you take a glass of water and put 1/3 of a teaspoon of sugar in it, that's about the level that people can start to taste. And if you take that water and put flavor in it and put, you know, alcohol in it and everything else, it gets even harder to detect that amount of sugar, and we basically don't taste it. So what we shoot for is for the wines to be so dry that there's no possibility of them re-fermenting in the bottle if we essentially bottle without a sterile filtration, because I don't like to sterile filter wines. So that's always our goal, and most years we meet that goal. The other thing that we did in 2017 with Pinot Blanc is we made our first sparkling wine in a really long time. So we made sparkling wine continuously from 1988 through 2000, and then we basically hung it up. And we made 2 little experiments in 6 and 7 that hardly count, but now we're making sparkling wine again. And the first of those is 2017 Cremant, meaning both definitions of the word, creamy and sparkling. And my daughter came up with the idea that we would call it Cremant de Innocent, because it sounds so classy. And maybe someone would think that I was classier than I really am. So let's see if we can get this foil off. So it is made in the traditional champagne method, which means that we make a base wine, and unlike most wineries in Oregon, we make the base wine. We then prepare it to go into this bottle, each one of these bottles, with a very active yeast culture. We add a little bit of sugar back to it, because what we want is that wine that used to be totally clear when we finished the base wine to go in the bottle with sugar and an active yeast culture, and then for the yeast to eat up all of that sugar, but the carbon dioxide that's created in that fermentation to not escape, to stay in this bottle with the bubbles in this bottle. So it essentially means that we make one fermentation for the base wine and then 800 fermentations in individual bottles and hope that everything goes well. And I say hope that everything goes well because it was so well. That's got some gas. That that didn't happen for all of the wine in 2017. So we were hoping that you could get this bottle in your wine club and then come and taste it and say, "Oh, it's so fabulous! I want another case," and we'd be able to give it to you. But the reality is that you're going to get your bottle in the wine club, and you're going to have to wait till next year to get your other case that you want, because there isn't any extra. You as a wine club member are the only people that are going to get this little gem. So 100% Pinot Blanc, bottle fermented, hand riddled by my guys here, and a little bit by me, but I can't take much credit because I didn't do much of it. Disgorged, and you want to see this, and Gia has taken a video of me doing this.
Facebook and go to Instagram. Tell them to go to Instagram.
Go to Instagram and find it. It'll be fabulous, darling. Okay, so 100% Pinot Blanc, method Champenois, and unlike most people in Oregon, we do everything ourselves, and every single bottle that I've ever made for 32 years that I made a sparkling wine, I disgorged myself. I'm not sure that's a badge of honor, but I did. So I know that beyond me, there's some other people here who want to make this bottle go empty really fast, so we're going to pass it around. When those yeast essentially sit on this bottle, they create a set of flavors that we want in sparkling wine. And that usually goes from bread dough to baked bread to toast to nuts to toasted nuts, and then really to kind of more oxidized kinds of things the older the wine is. So that one of the things you're looking for is just not the wine, but the age of all that time that we allowed it to sit on the yeast. Evidence of that is in the nose. And you just get this really nice kind of toasty brioche, kind of mixed with this loveliness of the Pinot Blanc fruit. Although this is more for me in the sort of green apples, green pear side instead of the Honeycrisp Asian kind of realm. It's a little bit more on point than the Pinot Blanc. Here it is again. There's still something left. Someone will get some later. What is really nice is that there is a very luxuriant richness of texture on the palate. It almost seems like the fruit is really there, like almost like you're drinking a little bit of a syrupy kind of thing, but it's not syrupy. It only has a very small amount of residual sugar added at the dosage, just a little bit above that, what we call the threshold level in the wine. But with the creaminess of the bubbles and the richness of the flavor profile, it's really nice. And if you can destroy it if you want and have it with wedding cake, but it would be really great with some good sushi. It would be great with, some quickly sauteed sole in a pan with some fresh asparagus and maybe a little risotto, those kind of things. It would just be...
The back porch.
It would be good with your back porch. I hear that it's especially good with your back porch, which you're kind of stuck enjoying repeatedly right now. It's a very lovely drink, and again, I wish that I had more than the one bottle, but I don't. Enjoy it. It's not a wine to sit around and age. It's a bottle of wine to just have a nice night when you want to share it with somebody else, because if you share it with a bunch of people, you're not going to be happy that you're pouring it in other people's glasses and they want more. So I would say a very small group, just crack it open and a little anything you want to eat. I mean, I'd even eat oatmeal cookies with this. I'm not very picky, It's pretty damn good. Not wedding cake, okay? You know. Bonus wines. Oeil de Perdrix. 2019. Perdrix means eye of the partridge. It gets its name from the color, which is very, very pale pink. We don't call it a rosé, although it kind of fits in the rosé category. Because one of the things that happens with rosé is that you make rosé by taking red grapes and allowing the juice to come in contact with the skin for some period of time. So there is extraction of the tannins and the flavors and the colors from the skin in rosé. These grapes are 100% Pinot Noir, and it is pressed immediately. So we put the grapes in the press, whole cluster, so there's no juice in contact. We then turn the press on and relatively quickly squeeze the juice out of the clusters. And I mean relatively quickly, because if we were making Chardonnay, we would spend 3 hours pressing it. But for this, we spend about 40 minutes, because we don't even want the juice, as it's released, to really sit at all in contact with the skins. Now, because it's so short, the reality is the yields are very poor. Now, in most years, we would take some average grapes from a vineyard. We'd use Temperance and Zenith. However, the first time we ever made this, we made it from Momtazi vineyard, which are really expensive grapes. Not because we intended to make it, but because in 2011, which was a very late, very cold vintage, Momtazi, which is on very poor, thin, very highly stressed conditions, one of the blocks basically just dropped all of its leaves before the clusters were all had their decent color and anywhere near the ripeness level you'd use to make red wine. So we were staring at some really expensive fruit that we were like, what can we do with it? And we actually started to make initially a different wine, a dry white wine that was aged in a barrel. And when we found out during the fermentation that this flavor profile just appeared, we said, forget it. We're going to make this wine because it's a perfect example of what it could be. However, that thing that it could be had never been made before. It's not a paradigm of wine that exists in the world like rosé or Chardonnay or Tavel or, all these other things. It was essentially an unusual product made from grapes in a really unusual set of circumstances. And then in the following years, we just kind of recreated it. Well, in 2019, I decided that I would make it, but not just from some average grapes, but I would make it from that same block at Momtazi, which is really expensive grapes at a really low crop level. And I decided to steal half of that block and make just over 100 cases of this wine. So you have, and not in a stressed condition. I mean, we didn't have to make it. We could have made red wine, really good red wine from these grapes. But we picked them very early, like we picked in that first vintage, so that the alcohol would be very low, like around 10.5 or 11%. That we would have really great acidity, which makes it really good for rich kind of textural, I call it my picnic wine. Think of what you eat in a picnic. And most things in a picnic are really about kind of rich, let's face it, they're about fat, okay? Potato salad, coleslaw, fried chicken, cold cuts, cheeses, very rich things in your mouth that need acid to clean your palate off. And this has become, for me, the ultimate picnic wine. So this was made from that original block, not from average grapes, but from fabulous grapes, all the 115 clone of Pinot Noir from Momtazi in 2019. As you can see in the glass, there's very little color. And the Oeil de Perdrix essentially is a description used mostly for sparkling wines, where you make a non-rosé from black grapes, but there's a tiny bit of color. And the Oeil de Perdrix translates into eye of the partridge. and I have not actually seen a partridge close enough to see the color of its eyes, but I have it on good authority that it's a very, very pale pink, and that's where this name comes from. We have a picnic pairing with Oeil de Perdrix, and it is a whole variety of picnic foods that you can order and you can pick up from us, so you don't have to cook for your picnic. It's available, ready to go, and it matches with this wine perfectly, like perfectly. But right now I'm just going to enjoy it because it smells really nice. It's got a very kind of red, bright fruit, floral, almost like red flower kind of smell. And oh, the staff wants some, so the bottle just mysteriously disappeared. So by picking early, you have really good acidity. And it's that acid that allows you to cut through those rich flavors. In the past, we have made this somewhat sweet. This year, we didn't. It's actually quite dry. Even drier than the original one we made from Amtazi in 2011, which was about 1.7 residual. This only has 0.9% residual. The other vintages of it after Momtazi all had around 2 or slightly more than 2% residual. For me, this is the perfect balance, that you have a little bit of sweetness to bring out the fruit on the original exposure to your palate. At the end, that sweetness disappears and you're left with that fresh, kind of vibrant loveliness. So thank you for persevering. If you made it to the end, pat yourself on the back, open a bottle of St. Innocent, you deserve it. And hopefully the social distancing may, by the time you watch this, already be over and you can come and taste with us, or soon you will be able to come and taste with us when it's safe. Take care of yourselves, be healthy, and thanks for supporting us at St. Innocent.